Hello and welcome to the SOCH 3 Module 10 video lecture on identifying evidence. Evidence plays a central role in critical thinking for a variety of reasons that we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks. So first I want you to recall that an author, any author, someone speaking to you, someone who has written a paper that you're trying to evaluate, it's their obligation to provide sufficient and correct reasons for you that they are saying you should support their conclusion. These reasons must be supported with evidence that backs up those claims, or really why else should you believe them? And you should do this in your own writing as well when you're trying to convince your reader of why they should accept your conclusion about a particular issue. So in thinking about the critical questions that we should ask when it comes to both identifying and evaluating evidence, we really want to focus first on, are the author's claims dependable? Should we trust them? Are the author's claims mere opinions? Is this just something they think, or do they actually have some other kind of evidence that backs up what they're trying to tell you? Or are the author's claims facts supported by the preponderance of reliable and recent evidence? And that last question there, if you can answer yes to that question, that is the gold standard in critical thinking. So there are three types of factual claims that when we come across these types of claims, we always want to ask, where's the evidence for the author's claims? And the first is a descriptive conclusion, or really statements that are supported by research evidence. So an example here is college graduation is associated with higher lifetime earnings. And this is actually a correlation that has been supported by a lot of research over many decades. And actually, for those of you who are struggling through the semester, keep this in mind. It's all for good. College graduates, compared to those without a college degree, will earn anywhere from $600,000 to $800,000 more in lifetime earnings. So hang in there. There's a lot of good reason to do so. We also will often come across reasons that are used to support descriptive or prescriptive conclusions. So an example here is someone who might say, we need to increase college access. College graduates make more money and have better health outcomes. So notice that second sentence about college graduates making more money is a reason used to support the prescriptive conclusion that we need to increase college access. And remember, prescriptive conclusions are ones where the author is trying to say something about what we should do, not what already is. And then finally, we have descriptive assumptions, and these are unstated claims that link our reasons to our conclusions. And we've been talking a lot about that important relationship, and one of the main goals of critical thinking is to be able to identify what are the reasons that the author is offering to support the conclusion, and are those valid reasons. So an example here would be, state governments need to invest more in public education because too many students do not graduate on time. So where's the unstated claim there? Well, we talked a couple of weeks ago about assumptions, identifying assumptions, right? Hopefully you remember that, and you can easily see here that there's an assumption on the author's part that too many students are not graduating on time because state governments are not investing more money in education to increase classes, keep class size low, make sure that there are actually spots in the classes that you want to enroll in. So that's an unstated assumption here on the part of the author. So these are three major types of factual claims for which authors will need to provide evidence. So what are some valid sources of evidence? So there are really three main types of valid evidence that we should be most inclined to accept when an author claims that these are matters of fact. The first one is when a claim appears to be undisputed knowledge. So an example here is drinking water is good for general health. This is really an undisputed point. The medical community, your parents have probably told you this. Maybe friends tell you, drink water, it's good for you. So no one really disputes that drinking water is good for your health. The second one is when the claim is a conclusion from a well-reasoned argument. So the example here might be, all professors have advanced degrees. Dr. Smith is a professor, therefore Dr. Smith has an advanced degree. And this is actually a particular kind of reasoning called deductive logic that we're going to talk about soon. The final category, and we're going to talk a lot about this one because this is really the gold standard in in critical thinking. We always want to ask, where's the evidence? And oftentimes evidence that's in the form of research studies is most desirable. So when the claim is supported by solid evidence, such as in the following statement: according to the United States Department of Labor, unemployment rates dropped from January 2014 to January 2015. Therefore, more people are working now than a year ago. This is solid evidence. The United States Department of Labor is a very reputable source for this information. In fact, it is the most reputable source for collecting statistics on unemployment rates. So we're going to talk about 5 major sources of evidence. And you notice I have 8 here. I include 8 because in the Asking the Right Questions text, they do talk about these 8, but they do break them apart, and I'm glad because this is covering a lot of material. We're only going to talk about the top 5 this week, and we're going to save the latter 3 for next week. So this week we're going to talk about intuition, personal experiences, case examples, testimonials, and appeals to authorities or experts as major sources of evidence that you'll likely encounter in evaluating arguments. So let's take these one by one. The first is intuition as evidence. You're probably familiar with the word intuition. It refers to an instinctive feeling, maybe something that we think is common sense, a gut feeling or a hunch. And we tend to use intuition as evidence when we believe that we have direct insight into something, but without really being able to consciously express our reasons. Now, there are a couple of problems with intuition as a source of evidence. First, intuition is a very private experience that other people really have no basis of which to judge the dependability. The second major problem is that intuition often reflects personal biases and tends to ignore rational evidence. Not always, but there is that tendency. So an example here, you may be familiar with this issue, is a lot of the commentary around vaccines, whether or not we should vaccinate children, and vaccines' potential connection to autism. So I'll say right now, in terms of the scientific evidence on this, there has been no reputable study linking autism to vaccines, but Jenny McCarthy has in the past been a very vocal advocate against getting one's children vaccinated. Jenny McCarthy does not have any kind of research or scientific degrees, and when she was talking to the public about why she knew, as a matter of fact, that her son's autism was caused by a vaccine that he received, she said that it was because of her mommy instincts. And so this was a case where intuition, right, she's talking about mommy intuition, really went against all of the scientific evidence. Again, there's no connection whatsoever between vaccines and autism. But this is an example in which someone very problematically used intuition as a source of evidence. Another major category is using personal experience as evidence, or relying on one's unique individual experience of a particular phenomenon or event or process. There are a couple of problems with this one as well. A single personal experience is likely not a representative example that reflects larger social patterns across many different cases or people. A second problem is that when we base a conclusion on one experience, this often causes us to make really hasty or quick generalizations about social groups. Recall our discussion of stereotypes. The hasty generalization is actually another logical fallacy. Remember, we learned about those last week. And so basing our conclusions on just one personal experience is not very reliable because it doesn't take into account patterns. So an example here might be, and I've heard people say this before, I once saw a person use food stamps at a grocery store and then get into a fancy car and drive away. There is so much welfare fraud. So notice here that the person is using this personal experience as evidence that there is so much welfare fraud. Well, but that's just one particular personal experience this person observed. We don't necessarily know anything about the person's economic situation because of their car. It may not belong to them. And again, it is just one individual personal experience. Similarly, case examples are often used as evidence, and this entails using a detailed illustrative description or story about one or several people or events to support a conclusion. A couple of problems here as well. Authors tend to use the most striking cases to support their conclusion, the case that they're wanting you to believe, and the most striking cases, again, are often not representative of larger trends. Problem two with this is that dramatic cases are often meant to directly appeal to our emotions, and in doing so, this emotional appeal tends to distract us from more relevant research evidence, again, about larger trends. So an example here, notice this picture I have here in the right corner. Some of you may be familiar with who this little girl was. That is JonBenét Ramsey, who was supposedly abducted from her home by a stranger in the 1990s. Isn't she adorable? But a news story about a beautiful white child abducted by a stranger, and using this as a case example to make claims about stranger danger and the steps we should take to protect our children, is really problematic. So there's a couple of problems with this. One, children who are not white are disproportionately missing or abducted in the United States. And if you've noticed, a lot of the cases that get the most media attention are children who are white, which tends to distort our particular view of this particular issue. Also, most of children who are abducted are not abducted by strangers. They are in fact abducted by other family members or people that the family know. So the JonBenét Ramsey case kicked up a lot of fear, especially among parents, that their children were endangered. But in this particular case, it really drew our attention away from the real threat, which tends to be people that the children or the parents know really well. Next, we have testimonials as evidence. You're probably very familiar with what a testimonial is if you're someone who perhaps has ever watched an infomercial. This is a form of personal experience in which someone provides a statement supporting the value of a product, event, or service. Several problems with this one. First of all, personal experiences tend to differ quite a lot, right? We don't want to make that hasty generalization that one personal experience is representative of a larger social trend. The second problem is that those who are providing testimonials often seek to gain financially or otherwise from their endorsement. So this could really present a biased view in terms of the evidence. Problem number three is that testimonials rarely provide sufficient information about the basis of this person's judgment, right? Usually it's just a matter of saying, I love this product, or, you should buy this because it works so well for me. So there are many examples that I could have chosen here. But last night as I was going to bed, I was watching TV and an Aveeno commercial with Jennifer Aniston came on TV. And so as I was putting together this lecture, I thought about this as an example. Aveeno is a skin product line, for those of you who don't know. And Jennifer Aniston, look at this picture. Isn't she glowing and beautiful? Wouldn't you want to buy Aveeno? Absolutely. But the problem, she was paid for this endorsement. Maybe you use an Aveeno product and don't have the results that she does. And what is she basing her judgment on? Jennifer Aniston is a very famous and very wealthy celebrity, so she probably has a lot of other things that she buys in her life to help her maintain this beautiful glow. And let's not even get into the fact that she probably is covered in makeup put on by professionals and in lighting by professionals. So there are a lot of things working there to make her look really good. It's probably not just the Aveeno. And finally, for this week, we have appeals to authority as evidence. So this entails relying on experts who are assumed to have specific claims to knowledge about a given topic. Three major problems here. Some authorities are much more careful than others in stating and justifying their claims. Authorities can be and often are wrong, problem two. And then finally, problem three, authorities can be biased because of a variety of reasons: their political preferences, their ideological commitments, and their personal needs. Or maybe if they stand, like Jennifer Aniston, to benefit financially from endorsing a particular product. So a critical question we want to ask anytime that an author appeals to an authority figure or an expert is this authority in a position to have especially good access to pertinent facts based on their educational experience, research experience, or first-hand work with relevant populations or issues? If you can answer yes to this question, that's usually a good indication that this person is in the best position to provide evidence on this particular topic. And I want to give you an example of that. So the second reading I had you do for this week, in addition to the chapter in the Keeley and Brown text, was what I found is a very interesting reading by Barbara Erickson entitled Social Networks, the Value of Variety. So this is a very cool piece of sociological research that looks at how knowing a variety of people, even people we don't know that well, just acquaintances, can be incredibly